There's a specific kind of disappointment that doesn't feel dramatic at the time. No arguments, no tantrums, no moment where you throw your controller down and declare you're done with something forever. It's quieter than that. It's the moment you realise a game is still doing exactly what it's supposed to do and you're just not the person it's meant for anymore. And the strange part, it happens faster than you might expect. Because if you'd asked me only a year earlier, maybe even less, I would have happily played Aladdin or Toy Story on the Super Nintendo and loved them. Bright colours, simple rules, familiar characters, that stuff still worked on me. But the PlayStation changed the timeline. It didn't just introduce 3D, it introduced choice. Suddenly, games weren't all coming from the same place anymore. You could go from cartoon mascots to horror, to realism, to things that probably weren't meant for you at all. And once that door opens, it doesn't really close again, which makes this episode interesting because these are Disney games on the PlayStation 1 released between 1996 and 1998. On paper, they should have been the perfect fit, trusted brand, family friendly, big licenses, but playing them now and remembering how I felt back then, this is where something subtle happens. This is where Disney is still doing what it's always done, and I'm already looking somewhere else. Not because these games are bad, not because they're broken, not because they failed, but because the PlayStation was no longer just a toy for kids. It was becoming a place where different audiences were being catered to at the same time, and for the first time, Disney wasn't chasing me, they were staying where they were, which makes this episode less about quality and more about distance. Welcome back to the PSX Index. I'm Parasine, and this is the Disney Bundle Part 1. Disney didn't rush into the PlayStation era, and that hesitation matters. By the mid-90s, Disney already knew how to make games. The 16-bit era had treated them well. Aladdin, The Lion King, and Toy Story, these were polished, confident, technically impressive games that worked exactly as intended. But the PlayStation wasn't just a new console, it was a different environment. 3D was still awkward, cameras were unreliable, controls were being invented in real time, and for a company built on trust, parental trust especially, that was a dangerous territory. So when Disney arrived on the PlayStation 1 between 1996 and 1998, they didn't arrive boldly, they arrived carefully. These games aren't just experiments, they're not risky. They're not trying to redefine anything, they're trying to survive the jump to 3D without breaking the promise Disney had already made to parents and kids alike. That promise being, this is safe, this will work, this won't scare you, which immediately puts these games at odds with what the PlayStation was becoming known for. While other developers were pushing edge, mood and tension, Disney was focused on clarity, clear objectives, clear characters, clear presentation. Even the way these games move feels cautious. Levels are contained, cameras are predictable, the worlds feel like stages rather than places. That's not incompetence, that's policy. Disney games on the PS1 aren't designed to surprise you, they're designed to reassure you, and that makes perfect sense when you remember who these games were for. These weren't aimed at the kids secretly watching horror films with an older sibling. They were aimed at the kids whose parents wanted something familiar, branded, and guaranteed not to cause problems. Which is why so many of these early Disney PS1 games feel like they're standing just outside the chaos of the era. They exist on the same console as Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but they don't acknowledge them at all. They stay in their lane. Bright colours, recognisable music, simple progression. And if you were still fully inside that lane, they probably worked beautifully. But if you'd already taken a few steps outside it, that's where distance starts to show.
We dance, we kiss, we schmooze, we carry on, we go home happy. What do you say? Come on. All right.
If there's one game in this bundle that still feels like it belongs to me, it's Disney's Hercules. And that makes sense. Not because I loved the film, although I absolutely did, but because Hercules is the rare Disney PS1 game that doesn't feel apologetic about being a game. It's colourful, it's loud, and it's energetic. And cruelly, it's hard. Properly hard. This wasn't a gentle walk through a movie tie-in. This was a game that expected you to learn its systems, react quickly, and accept punishment when you messed up. As a kid, I played it on an easier difficulty. I got through most of it. I felt accomplished. I thought I'd won, and then I found out the truth. You don't get the real ending on easy. No final confrontation, no proper closure, no Hades. The game just stops, which looking back is a wild decision for a game aimed at children. It's not subtle either, it doesn't soften the blow, it simply says, that was practice, come back when you're ready. At the time, that felt unfair, almost cruel. Now, I kind of respect it, because Hercules isn't interested in being your babysitter. It wants you to earn the victory, it wants you to deserve the ending. And when I finally did go back years later and beat it properly, that payoff landed. Not because the ending itself is spectacular, but because the game had held its ground. It didn't change to accommodate me, I had to rise to meet it. Mechanically, it's also one of the strongest games here. The animation style borrows heavily from the film's exaggerated line work, which translates surprisingly well into 3D. Characters move with purpose, attacks feel weighty, enemies don't just exist to be knocked aside, and the music sticks. I still catch myself humming bits without realising where it came from. That upbeat theatrical energy that somehow made platforming feel like a performance. This was Disney doing what it does best, taking a strong identity and committing to it fully. And for a moment, just a moment, Hercules made me feel like the Disney and the PlayStation were still walking in step. But even here, here's the tension. Because while I was pushing through Hercules, learning patterns, retrying sections and accepting failure, something else was starting to pull at me, not away from games entirely, just away from this lane. And that's where things began to shift.
Yes, Hades rules! A word of caution to this tale.
A Bug's Life is the easiest game in this bundle to misunderstand, because if you approach it as an adult, it's tempting to dismiss it quickly. Bright colours, friendly characters, a world that feels designed to be reassuring rather than challenging. But that's not why it lost me. It lost me because of timing. I didn't bounce off A Bug's Life because it was poorly made. I bounced off it because something else had already caught my attention. I remember playing the first level. I remember understanding what the game wanted from me, and I remember, very clearly, not wanting to continue. Not out of frustration, out of disinterest. Which, at that age, feels strange, because only a year or so earlier, this kind of game would have been exactly my thing. Platforming, collecting, clear objectives, a world that makes sense. But by the time A Bug's Life landed, my curiosity had shifted. I was starting to look sideways at other games that felt heavier, moodier, more dangerous. I was still young, but I was already aware that some games were meant to feel safe, and others weren't. And A Bug's Life wears its safety proudly. The level design is generous, the pacing is patient, the stakes never feel high, which is ideal if you're the audience it's built for. I wasn't anymore. The most vivid memory I have of A Bug's Life isn't a boss fight or a clever puzzle, it's the game over screen.
This is a game?
No, please!
Well, guess what? You just lost.
That stuck with me more than the game itself. Not because it scared me, but because it felt like a signpost. A quiet confirmation that this was still a children's game, and I was already drifting away from the category. That's not a criticism of A Bug's Life, it's a record of a moment. The moment where Disney was still offering me something familiar, and I was already peeking behind the curtain at things I probably wasn't meant to see yet. Which makes A Bug's Life important in a different way. Not as a standout, not as a failure, but as evidence of a split happening in real time. Disney stayed where it was, I didn't. This is where the PSX Index does what it does best. Because Mickey's Wild Adventure and Magical Tetris Challenge aren't games I grew up with. There's no nostalgia buffer here, no muscle memory, no emotional attachment. These are first time plays, experienced now as part of the index, and that matters. Mickey's Wild Adventure feels like Disney cautiously testing the water. It's colourful, readable, and unmistakably Mickey. The animation is expressive, the worlds are tidy, and nothing ever feels out of control. It's competent, almost aggressively so. This is a game designed to never surprise you in the wrong way. Enemies behave as expected, obstacles are clearly signposted, failure never feels punishing. which makes it perfectly fine, but also slightly forgettable. There's not an ear that grabs you by the collar, nothing that demands attention beyond the moment you're in it. It's a game that exists to be finished, not obsessed over. And again, that's not a flaw, that's intent. Magical Tetris Challenge, on the other hand, is fascinating for entirely different reasons, because it answers a question no one asked. What if Tetris, but Disney? Mechanically, it's still Tetris. Blocks fall, lines clear, panic sets in at higher speeds. That part is untouched. What changed is the framing. Disney characters, bright backdrops, a layer of narrative and personality wrapped around one of the most mechanically pure games ever made. And the result is strange. Not bad, just strange. It feels like two worlds politely sharing space without ever fully blending. Tetris doesn't need characters, Disney doesn't need abstraction, and yeah, here they are, coexisting. Playing it now, it feels less like a bold experiment and more like a brand gravity doing its thing. Disney stretching itself over everything it can reach. And to be fair, it works well enough. But it also highlights something important about this era of Disney on the PS1. These games aren't chasing innovation, they're chasing presence. They're making sure Disney exists on the console, even if it doesn't always have something urgent to say. And that's a very different energy from the PlayStation's more famous output. Taken individually, these games don't say much, but taken together as a group, in context, they start to form a pattern. Disney's early PlayStation output isn't about experimentation, it isn't about pushing boundaries, and it definitely isn't about chasing the identity of the PlayStation 1, which it would later become famous for. It's about continuity. These games exist to reassure, to carry Disney safely from the 2D world into 3D without breaking trust, without alarming parents, and without asking too much of the player. That's why they feel contained. That's why they feel cautious. That's why even the harder moments, like Hercules locking its ending behind difficulty, still operates within clear, readable rules. Disney wasn't trying to shock anyone, they were trying to make sure characters survived the transition intact. And in that sense, these games succeed. They look like Disney, they sound like Disney, they behave like Disney. What they don't do is evolve alongside the PlayStation's shifting identity. While other developers were discovering atmosphere, tension, and psychological weight, Disney stayed anchored to familiarity. And again, that's not a failure. It's a choice that worked for its audience. It just wasn't me anymore. That's the quiet truth at the heart of this episode. I didn't stop liking Disney. Disney didn't stop making competent games. We simply drifted apart. And the PlayStation 1, more than any console before it, made that drift visible. Because for the first time, the same machine could offer bright cartoons and existential horror and expect both to coexist. Disney chose safety, I chose curiosity, and both paths made sense.
I just love an unhappy ending, Mambo.
That's index entries 36 through to 39 complete. 4 games down, 4 very different approaches to carrying childhood into 3D. That brings the PSX index to 39 games completed, 1,239 to go, and as calm and as colourful as the chapter has been, it doesn't last long, because next, the index swings hard into the opposite direction. Episode 19, Nightmare Creatures, a game that doesn't want to reassure you, doesn't want to guard you, and definitely doesn't care if you feel safe. After Disney's careful hands-off approach, this one feels like being thrown into the dark without a warning. The PSX index moves on. This has been Parasine. Thanks for sticking around. Things are about to get a little darker.